This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hey, just a quick note, this episode runs pretty long. It's nearly 50 minutes this week, so you have a double episode cram-packed with awesomeness, all about openings. We bring in, each of us picked a book, brought it in, and read the opening, and then of course we discuss it. So I just wanted to let you know, if you would like to read along or want to go back and look at those openings later on your own, think about them. They are available in the show notes at storyworkspodcast.com, and this is episode 11. Enjoy! Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Robert, Kathryn, and I are going to talk about beginnings. They are so important. We spend many revisions trying to perfect that beginning and the opening hook to ensure that our readers will keep reading, and really boils down to buy the book. So we are doing something fun tonight, something a little different. Instead of just talking about what makes a good beginning, we've each selected a novel, and we're going to read the beginnings and then discuss our reaction to the beginning. Now, we have not shared our novels with each other before this, so we're getting raw, honest reactions to these beginnings. And we also decided to pick literary novels because we spend so much time talking about genre and genre tropes and reader expectations. And with a literary novel, the opening hook isn't about reader expectations. It's about setting the stage for a story and introducing some kind of character and some kind of scenario that is going to be compelling to that reader. And it can be any kind of character in any kind of scenario in any kind of setting. So that is why we chose literary for our genre tonight. All right, who wants to go first?
Nobody's hands go up.
No. All right, do you want me to?
I don't mind if you want.
You don't mind if I want to go, or you don't mind if I want you to go?
I'll get on with that, Alida. You go first.
Okay. Right. Yeah, we should totally rock, paper, scissors. All right. So I brought in The Death of Vishnu by Manil, Suri. And this was a finalist for the PEN Faulkner Award some years ago. Not wanting to arouse Vishnu in case he hadn't died yet, Mrs. Asrani tiptoed down to the third step above the landing on which he lived, tea kettle in hand. Vishnu lay sprawled on the stone, his figure aligned with the curve of the stairs. The laces of a pair of sneakers twined around the fingers of one hand. The other lay outstretched, as if trying to pull his body up the next step. During the night, Mrs. Asrani noted with distress, Vishnu had not only thrown up, but also soiled himself. She had warned her neighbor, Mrs. Patak, not to feed Vishnu when he was so sick, but did that woman ever listen? She tried not to look at the large stain spreading through the worn material of Vishnu's khaki pants, the ones that her husband had given him last Diwali. What a mess. The Jamadarni would have to be brought in to clean up such a mess, and it would not be free either. Someone would have to pay. Her large frame heaving against the sari in which it was swaddled. Mrs. Asrani peered at Vishnu from the safety of the third step and vowed it would not be her. A more immediate problem had to be dealt with first. What to do about the cup of tea she brought Vishnu every morning? On the one hand, it was obvious that Vishnu did not have much need for tea right now. Even yesterday, he had barely stirred when she had filled his plastic cup, and she had felt a flutter of resentment at not having received her usual salam in return. On the other hand, giving tea to a dying man was surely a very propitious thing to do. Since she had taken this daily task upon herself, it would be foolish to stop now, when at most a few more cups could possibly be required. Besides, who knew what sort of repercussions would rain down upon her if she failed to fulfill this daily ritual? Pressing the edge of her sari against her nose to keep out the smell, Mrs. Asrani descended gingerly to the landing. Using the scrap of brown paper she had brought along for the purpose, she fished out the cup from the small pile of belongings near Vishnu's head, taking care to always keep the paper between her fingers and the cup, so as not to infect herself with whatever he had. She placed the cup on the step above the landing and poured tea from the kettle. Hating the idea of good tea being wasted, she hesitated when the cup was half full, but only for a second, filling it to its usual level to fulfill her pledge. Then she ascended the steps and surveyed her handiwork. The cup lay steaming where she had left it, but now Vishnu looked like he was stretching out across the landing to try and reach it, like a man dead in the desert, grasping for the drink that could have saved him. She thought about moving the cup to correct this, but the scrap of paper she had used now lay on the landing, and she couldn't be sure which surface had touched the cup. There was nothing she could do anymore, so she turned and climbed up the remaining steps. At the door of her flat, it occurred to her that she still didn't know if Vishnu was alive or dead. But it didn't really matter. She had done her duty in either case. Satisfied, Mrs. Asrani entered her flat and closed the door behind her.
That's fantastic.
Isn't it?
Oh dear, that's rich. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gotta digest for a moment.
A little bit.
Mrs. Asrani? Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
You already know so much about it, don't you? From those few paragraphs.
Yeah.
And the first sentence, just the first sentence is fantastic. It just completely establishes it, you know. Is he dead or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talking about the power of a first sentence and hooking a reader, not wanting to arouse Vishnu. Okay. In case he hadn't died yet. Ooh.
Yeah. That's right. Oh, okay.
All right, now I have to find
That's
out more.
a little unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Isn't it?
And then you never find out that much about Vishnu either. He's wearing khaki pants that her husband gave him, and that he's very sick or something. But that's about all you find out.
Yeah, and he's prone and had obviously been trying to do something when he found himself in that prone position, and he may or may not be alive.
Right. We still don't know if he's alive or not.
And yeah, he plays a part in the scene because she has to work around him.
Right. Well, and he lives on the steps. So somewhere it says on the landing on which he lived. So he lives on the landing in this apartment building. So
he's fallen around the curve, or he's curved around. It was hard to place it. I definitely would have to read on or to get the sense of the description.
So she tiptoed down to the third step above the landing on which he lived, and then he was sprawled on the stone aligned with the curve of the stairs. So he's dying on the steps below this landing where he lives, which is part of an apartment building. And then Mrs. Asrani brings him a cup of tea every morning. So I love that conflict and this debate she has with herself. Like, does she fulfill this good deed, this pledge she made for the karma, or does she, which could then risk her health, and she's got that scrap of paper and the sari held over her mouth. So she's really in this predicament, and we don't know how contagious he is or how serious the predicament is. Is it
right?
Is she exaggerating this and sort of turning it into something so that she can be more heroic and giving him this cup of tea?
You've got the immediate sense of selfless versus selfish, haven't you? And you just, and she's conflicted about that as well. And then overriding that, there's the culture of the setting, which is the expectation that one's duties have to be done, and that there is a religious duty, and a pledge that she has to fulfill, which she does fulfill, even though it's ludicrous. For us, it's ludicrous, but within that culture, it's perhaps perfectly appropriate.
Right. Well, and she never considers calling somebody for help. There's no mention of a doctor or an ambulance, or it's just
all about the tea.
Yeah,
somebody's going to have to clean up this mess. The only thing I'm going to do is the tea.
Yes.
And the minimal amount of effort for the tea possible. Here, I'll just put it, he can sort of maybe reach it if he tried.
That's right. Yeah. There we go. Job's done.
Right, exactly.
Duty fulfilled.
Even though it might be the thing that saves his life, we aren't going to go back and make sure he actually reaches it.
Right.
Yeah.
And when her scrap of paper has been potentially contaminated, it's not like she goes back and gets another scrap of paper. I don't get that she lives very far away. You know, she obviously lives right there.
Right.
So she could just get another scrap of paper and put it next to him, but no. She's just going to walk away.
Yeah.
Done.
And I love the last sentence in this section as well. Satisfied. Mrs. SWRT entered her flat and closed the door behind her. So there's that finality there of her duty has been fulfilled, and that, as you were saying, Kathryn, that is absolutely her limit.
Bare minimum. Done.
Yes, nothing else will be done. And don't you get the sense that this woman is self-righteous?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Definitely.
And there's so little of her thinking here. There's no dialogue. You know, we know somebody's going to pay to clean up the mess, and it won't be her. And, oh, well, her husband gave him those pants. So even without emphasis in the text being placed on it, just its presence there gives us the sense that...
Well, and she focuses on not only the fact that her husband gave him those pants, but that he has soiled them. So the pants that were given are now ruined, you know, or dirty at least. And so it's like that emphasis again. It's like she's doing this compassionate deed with absolutely no compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Out of obligation, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So is she the main character?
No, there are multiple point of view characters, so she is one of the points of view. Yeah, just one last thing about the sense of duty. There's a line in the middle. Who knew what sort of repercussions would rain down upon her if she failed to fulfill this daily ritual? So there's no compassion for Vishnu. It's just...
Right.
No, I wrote it down as driven by fear.
Yeah. What will she suffer if she doesn't fulfill this duty? Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Just such a beautiful job of layering in these clues to this character, the characterization in the narrative voice, you know, very subtly putting them in. So there are multiple point of view characters, and Vishnu's one, the next section is actually his point of view, but he's so out of it, you just kind of go into like his memories. So all of the characters live in this apartment building where Vishnu is dying on the steps, and you know, there's a rivalry between some of the wives who have to share a kitchen because the kitchen is like separate from their apartments, kind of in the middle. There's like a kitchen per floor. So everyone who lives on that floor has to share a kitchen, and I think the wives, one of them thinks the other one is stealing her ghee, her, you know, clarified butter for cooking. and there's like, you know, star-crossed lovers and the husband. So it's a family, multiple family drama set in this apartment building with this man dying on the steps.
Wow.
Yeah.
And would you say the man dying on the steps is the inciting incident, or is that just a hook?
Oh, it's been quite a while since I read this book, actually.
Yeah.
But Vishnu, so going into his point of view through this fevered state, we go back into the past and we look at his youth when he was young and strong and had a love affair with this girl. So, you know, that's a major part of the story while also following these other threads. So he's more than just a device to get at these other characters. His storyline is is central, but he's at this point in time where he's become the odd jobs man for this apartment building, and he, you know, like we would call him a vagrant, but he actually lives on their landing, and that's accepted. And that's
because he's a partial caretaker or a janitor or something.
Yeah, like he'll run errands or sweep stuff up or whatever for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's interesting to contrast that state of his life at his, you know, his time of dying to what we get in the flashbacks when we go into his point of view.
Right. So I guess the key question then is did that opening, however many paragraphs that was, make us want to read more? And why?
Right, that is the key question. So it's only 3 paragraphs, but it's a page and a half. So it ends right there.
Yep.
So, So do you want to read more?
Yeah, I would, just out of curiosity. I want to know why is Vishnu sick, and not so much Asrani, because you sort of get that, okay, here's a sort of, you know, on the outside pious woman. Although you'd be curious to know whether any karma comes down on her.
Right. I think I'm more interested in her in terms, because I already have this instant dislike, and so I want to know why is she even bothering with the tea. So I would read on just to find out what in the heck is she doing, still putting this tea down there if this guy's probably dead, because I have no idea. After reading just that little bit, it's like he's probably dead. Why does she care? You know, what's the consequences or things that she thinks are going to happen if she doesn't just deliver a cup of tea, and not just a cup of tea, a full cup of tea.
Right.
So,
which she hated to waste, but half a cup of tea would not fulfill her pledge.
Right. So, exactly.
So it was just so interesting, that tension, all within the one character, that there was no interaction with another person that was, you know, external to her head. There was dialogue. There was this figure who's, you know, mute and inert and probably dead, and it's all about her internal state and whether or not she can deliver the tea. And I think it's interesting that, Robert, you liked the figure of Vishnu and wanted to learn more about what put him in that state, and Kathryn, you liked Mrs. Asrani and want to know more about her conflict and what kind of a person she is and the repercussions there.
Right. I think you get a good sense of what kind of story this is going to be out of the opening too.
True.
Like you get that internal character conflicts that you're going to see, rather than some big flashbang action scene right at the beginning. It's going to be a quieter and yet still very tense and drama-filled interpersonal relationship story. So, yeah.
It sounds like it's going to be a story about what the difference between what people do and what they really think. And perhaps that's sort of fundamental in that Indian society as well.
Right. I think you're right, Robert. I think there's so much tension between expectations and desires, you know, like with the idea of the lovers and who the parents expect you to end up with, but, you know, do they do something about it, or do they behave as children in this family, and then the wives worrying about the neighbors, what they think and what they're doing, what she's doing to me, or what I'm doing to her, in this rivalry, and, you know.
And that's all established actually in what in the Western world would be considered a high stakes situation. You know, somebody on the verge of dying on a staircase. You wouldn't sort of think, oh, I must bring them a cup of tea. And yet that establishment of that opening, it all seems perfectly normal because of the way she's thinking about it. So I like how that's done as well. You don't sort of feel like, oh my God, why is she not rushing to go and get an ambulance? You sort of get that this is a different set of expectations. So it's very, you know, it sounds like almost everything about the book is already established in that opening scene. And that's where an author has to have such a deft hand, and probably why we rewrite them so many times.
Right, yeah, and that's a really good point, because you do want your opening scene to be true to the rest of the book, so that readers don't feel like there was some kind of a bait and switch. You want that opening scene to be representative of the kind of story you're going to tell. Which is why I suppose in the genre you've got so many tropes and reader expectations that instantly establish this is this category of this genre with these kinds of characters or this kind of action. Exactly. And in openings like this in the literary genre, that still holds true, but instead of trying to hit on a specific trope, you're trying to convey to the reader a sense of what they're going to get, so that internal conflict, relationships, desires versus expectations and duties, and all of that is there in just this one character's take on a situation.
Right. Whether or not Vishnu is dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And often there's this sort of standoff between the genre and the literary, where we sort of think, well, genre has got to be pulp fiction and page turner, and literary must therefore be slow and potentially boring because it's exploring inventive text. But this is not slow. What you've just read, it's in media res, so you're starting in the middle of action. We immediately know what kind of characters we're dealing with. It's just that because it doesn't have a particular genre setting, there are no obvious conventions that it has to follow.
Right.
But nonetheless, all the qualities of a great story, which is hooking you in, starting with some action, clearly setting out character conflicts, they're all present.
Right. Yep. Well said.
No.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. There's far less difference between literary fiction and genre fiction in terms of craft than people think there is. The difference is more about style than about execution. It's about
I think so.
What you emphasize as you create this story, and whether you're trying to fit within a genre category or go for something more universal to the human experience, like relationships and duty.
Yep.
So
yeah, I mean, perhaps the only thing you could argue maybe is that literary tends to lean towards more character driven, perhaps, because it doesn't rely on conventions. But right. I mean, it's another whole debate for another episode. But as you say, to me, it's only a difference between style and categorization. It's not in story execution, and I think those really get muddied sometimes. And what you bring with that example is a perfect example of something literary that is just as fast paced in its own way, and just as establishing of the as Kathryn says, of what you can expect to get from this book.
Right. Definitely. Who wants to go next?
I'm happy to go next if you want.
All right, go for it.
Go for it.
This is, and stop me if you. It's hard to sort of stop on this one because, you get into it. So if you need me to stop. This is called "I'll Give You the Sun" by Jandy Nelson. I'm not sure if either of you have read that. It's marketed as a young adult book, but I would recommend it to anybody. So the first chapter is called "The Invisible Museum" and has a subtitle, Noah, age 13. This is how it all begins. With Zephyr and Fry, reigning neighbourhood sociopaths, torpedoing after me, and the whole forest floor shaking under my feet as I blast through air, trees, this white-hot panic. "You're going over, you pussy," Fry shouts. Then Zephyr's on me, has both of my arms behind my back, and Fry's grabbed my sketch pad. I lunge for it, but I'm armless, helpless. I try to wriggle out of Zephyr's grasp. Can't. Try to blink them into moths. No, they're still themselves. 15-foot-tall 10th grade asshats who toss living, breathing 13-year-old people like me over cliffs for kicks. Zephyr's got me in a headlock from behind, and his chest heaving into my back into his chest. We're swimming in sweat. Fry starts leafing through the pad. "What you been drawing, Bubble?" I imagine him getting run over by a truck. He holds up a page of sketches. "Zeph, look at all these naked dudes." The blood in my body stops moving. "They're not dudes, they're David," I get out, praying I won't sound like a gerbil, praying he won't turn to later drawings in the pad, drawings done today when I was spying, drawings of them rising out of the water with their surfboards underarm, no wetsuits, no nothing, totally glistening and, holding hands. I might have taken some artistic license. So they're going to think they're going to kill me, even before they kill me, is what they're going to do. The world starts somersaulting. I fling words at Fry. You know, Michelangelo. Ever heard of him? I'm not going to act like me. Act tough and you are tough, as Dad has said and said and said, like I'm some kind of broken umbrella. Yeah, I've heard of him, Fry says, out of the big bulgy mouth that clumps with the rest of his big bulgy features under the world's most massive forehead, making it very easy to mistake him for a hippopotamus. He rips the page out of the sketch pad. Heard he was gay. He was. My mum wrote a whole book about it. Not that Fry knows. He calls everyone gay when he's not calling them homo and pussy. And me, homo and pussy and bubble. Zephyr laughs a dark demon laugh. It vibrates through me. Fry holds up the next sketch. More David. The bottom half of him. A study in detail. I go cold. They're both laughing now. It's echoing through the forest. It's coming out of birds. Again, I try to break free of the log Zephyr has me in so I can snatch the pad out of Fry's hands, but it only tightens Zephyr's hold. Zephyr, who's freaking Thor. One of his arms is choked around my neck, the other braced across my torso like a seatbelt. He's bare-chested, straight off the beach, and the heat of him is seeping through my T-shirt. His coconut suntan lotion's filling my nose, my whole head, the strong smell of the ocean too, like he's carrying it on his back. Zephyr dragging the tide along like a blanket behind him. That would be good. That would be it. Portrait. The boy who walked off with the sea. But not now, Noah. So not the time to mind paint this cretin. I snap back, taste the salt on my lips, remind myself I'm about to die. And we could go on, but there's more of this.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it actually goes on, and this is I would have read it if we had time.
Mm-hmm.
He ends up, he's being, obviously these bullies have got him in the hold, and he ends up getting an erection.
Oh no!
So the thing just gets completely out of control. It's hilarious. Anyway,
Oh wow!
it's a gorgeous book. It really is gorgeous.
Huh. Okay, well, I would definitely read more, because that is quite the solid hook there. Could
The
you
pacing on that right from the beginning, you just started like kind of speeding up a little bit. It was like, yep, that's exactly what I would do is reading it too, as I would start speeding up like, oh no, what's gonna happen? Like,
yeah,
you know something terrible is gonna happen to this poor kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you read the first sentence again?
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Sorry about that. Just
No problem.
unlock this thing. First sentence. Well, the first sentence is an unusual one, and I wouldn't choose it. This is how it all begins. But the first paragraph, with Zephyr and Fry, reigning neighbourhood sociopaths, torpedoing after me on the whole forest floor, shaking under my feet as I blast through air, trees, this white-hot panic.
Nice. I thought that was a comma after, or maybe a colon after, this is how it all begins. So,
No, full stop. Yeah.
Yeah, that is an interesting choice for a first sentence, and it creates anticipation. This,
Right.
what is this? What is
And also,
beginning now? You know?
Yeah, and it sets Noah up as a narrator. And in
Yeah.
fact, there are two. They're twins. He and Jude, his sister, and they're very different. And they're both told in first person present tense.
Nice.
And it alternates between them, and alternates times as well. So you get Noah age 13, and you get Noah age 16.
Interesting.
And two love stories, and Noah, who's clearly got a different sexual orientation, very well established in that first part as well, and they both have their different quirks as well. So he has this thing where he just gets these frozen moments where, and I'll do this on the video, but for the audio, I'm just holding up my hands, imagining that I'm taking a photo of something, and he just does these sort of little portrait things, and it's in parentheses. So portrait, girl on roof holding moon, and so he gets pictures of life that he then sketches out.
Yes, when he was talking about
Yeah.
this isn't the time to mind paint the Cretan pulling away from the sea, that was one of those
Right.
moments.
It's
I
in,
really enjoyed how, you've got that first sentence that is the tease, but then right away we're in action, so it doesn't go to setting or rumination, or it's fast. I don't think that first sentence would have worked as well if it hadn't immediately put us in action, but not just action, high stakes. He's going to get the crud beat out of him if, action. And those internal moments do such a good job of setting up intrigue that has to play out later, like when the guys are flipping through his notebook and he hopes they don't see the drawings of them coming out of the ocean holding hands. It just keeps getting better and better.
Right.
And you're like, oh God, are they going to see it? Are they going to get to those drawings? Oh no.
I like how visual it is too. Like, clearly the narrator / main character right there, Noah, he's clearly an artist. Even if you didn't have a sketch pad, the way that he's describing the world is all
them. Yes.
Right, exactly. And it's all in like almost like painting terms too, like that when he just breaks for the the mind picture, you see it. It's not like you hear the description of what his picture is. It's like it flashes into your mind just like
that's right.
Flashed
like
through his.
Fry says out of the big bulgy mouth that clumps with the rest of his big bulgy features under the world's most massive forehead. That's an artist being able to caricature somebody. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and you see it like a cartoon drawing on a board. Like boom, there it is. Yeah. And then he says hippopotamus and you immediately get that.
Right.
And that cracked me up immediately. But that so you get that really deep sense of his character and who he is as an artist, like right off the bat as well.
And the other thing is it's very fast, and as Alida has repeatedly said in fight scenes, this has taken, what did I read, probably a page and a half. And that's all one rough tumble where they're chasing him and they've pinned him down. And the guys look through the sketch pad. So, two guys chase me, pin me down, one of them goes to my sketch pad. That's it.
Right.
But it's slowed all the way down, and yet it feels fast.
Right. Well, the pace of the story is very fast, but you have to write the action in enough detail, which is where the volume of words comes from in order to create the picture in the reader's head of they aren't just boys and they aren't just bullies. They are 15-foot tall 10th graders who throw kids off of cliffs, normal living, breathing kids like me. Those moments are so beautifully descriptive. That voice, makes such a difference, and it piques our interest, our attention, because we want to see the next moment, and we want to see the next moment, because it isn't just they chased me, I was panting, we were sweating, they threw me down, they pulled my hair, whatever. It's that visual language that actually helps create the fast pace because it stimulates our mental movie maker,
And immediately his conflict. He's not out of the closet,
right?
So these bullies, if they knew he was gay, would throw him over the cliff.
Or they wouldn't come anywhere near him.
Or they wouldn't come anywhere near him. Yeah. So then he gets this erection, and then he's just absolutely doesn't know what to do and he thinks they've noticed it, and actually they don't. And then what happens is that I think they flip to maybe one in his sketch pad. There's a picture of his sister that he's drawn, and it established the fact that she's always saving him. So something happens to distract their attention, and she's always the one that's saving him. So that's established as well in that first sort of 2 or 3 pages. So
nice.
It was interesting rereading it, because in searching for what to read, you think about books, don't you? You think, what do I remember that I loved, and why did I love it? And it was certainly for the way the characters interacted and the voice. So It's interesting. I've come back to that rather than I loved it because of the action, or because the villain got beaten up or killed, or because the world was restored to rights. And so then when I reread the opening, I thought, oh goodness me, I've not reread this book ever. But it's just one that stuck with me. And as I read the beginning, I thought, oh, there's so much in there. That's fantastic.
Right.
I was reading something else last night, and I wanted to read this instead.
Right. Okay. So we were talking about what the scene in the death of Vishnu, how it established what the book would be about and what kind of book it is. And I liked, Robert, how you were saying we know right away what Noah's conflict is because he's not out of the closet. And now that's ready to explode. He's in a super vulnerable position. And it's not just a person on the ground getting beat up. It's a unique vulnerability to this character and to his life, so that enhances the stakes and the tension for the reader because of the specificity, and it's revealed in such an artful way. It's not because the bullies are calling him queer or something, it's because he's got these drawings and he's trying to protect them, and he's trying to keep them his private drawings and not general knowledge there.
And he's telling it as if this is nothing unusual. This is, these dudes go after him all the time. And so it's not even necessarily even just because he's an artist or even because they have any suspicion that he's gay. It's just because he's a victim and he's 13 and they're 10th grader jocks. So you've got that layer in there as well. And, having been bullied at probably that sort of age or a bit younger at school, I can completely identify with that sort of feeling of powerlessness that you want as the protagonist or one of the protagonists. You want him to be able to one day exact his revenge, and so already you've got that going for you in the story as well. Wow, that was a great opening. Recommend it anyway. I'm going to reread it. So highly recommended book. It's one of my all-time favorites for sure.
Excellent. All right, you want to read, Kathryn?
I will.
Excellent.
Okay, so I chose a book called A Sudden Light by Garth Stein, and this was one that actually was an accidental pickup for me. It was front and center on my library's homepage, and I was like, sure, why not? Because it's based in the Pacific Northwest. So it was like a local, read this. So here we go. It's got a prologue on it, and it's called The Curse. It says, growing up in rural Connecticut, I had been told the name Riddell meant something to people in the Northwest. My paternal great-great-grandfather was someone of significance, my mother explained to me. Elijah Riddell had accumulated a tremendous fortune in the timber industry, a fortune that was later lost by those who succeeded him. My forefathers had literally changed the face of America with axes and two-man saws and diesel donkeys to buck the fallen, with mills to pulp the corpses and scatter the ashes. They carved out a place in history for us all. And that place, I was told, was cursed. My mother, who was born of English peasant stock out of the peninsula of Cornwall, made something of herself by following her passion for the written word, eventually writing a dissertation that would earn her a PhD in comparative literature from the Harvard University and becoming the first in her family to receive an advanced degree. Though she never did anything of note with her brilliance, she did carry it around with her like a seed bag, sprinkling handfuls of it on whatever she deemed fertile soil. She spent much time quoting literature to me while I was young, thus sparking my own avid reading habits. So the theme of the ancient mariner and his story, as told by the poet and philosopher Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and how the mariner's story was emblematic of my family's history, was something I had heard often before my 14th birthday. The curse. When one destroys something of beauty in nature, as did the mariner who shot the kindly albatross that led his ship out of the perilous Antarctic Sea, one will be punished. Cursed. My mother told me this. My father nodded when she did. Punishment will rain down upon the offender and the family of the offender, I was told, until the debt is settled. The debt owed by my family has been paid, and then some. My mother believes our family story was settled with that debt. She has always maintained an unyielding faith in the cathartic power of denouement, which is why she has chosen to go for a walk this morning, rather than stay with us to hear me tell our story again. But I disagree with my mother. There is no tidy end to any story, as much as we might hope. Stories continue in all directions to include even the retelling of those stories themselves, as legend is informed by interpretation, and interpretation is informed by time. And so I tell you my story, as the mariner told his, he, standing outside the wedding party, snatching at a passing wrist, paralyzing his victim with his gaze, I, standing with my family at the edge of this immortal forest. I will tell this story because telling this story is what I must do.
Nice.
Ta-da!
And now we want to know how she was cursed. That's great.
Yeah, I like the meta quality to that.
Yes.
Referencing, history of the land and history of the family and the genealogy, and then the literature and the mariner's tale. And circling back around the curse multiple times, you aren't going to forget that there's a curse at the heart of the story.
So this is the framing as well, isn't it? This is the narrator drawing you to the fireside and saying, please be seated because we have before us a tale, but first let me establish why.
Exactly.
And it's brilliant. And there's so much backstory in there, isn't it? That can be referred to later. I mean, it's not detailed backstory; it's detailed enough that you get the sense of this weight of these incredibly solid people who just built things from nothing and made these massive fortunes, and then the curse came down and wiped them out. They paid their debt, or did they? And it's all established in a few paragraphs.
It actually tells you the whole story, basically, in those 4 paragraphs. And then you get to read the story all over again, because you know that it's been settled. It says right there, the debt owed by my family has been paid, and then some. But you want to know, wait, what debt? How? Why?
Right.
And it sounds like it's come at some cost to her as well, though.
To the mother? Or the narrator?
To the narrator, to me.
The narrator's a guy. You don't get that in the first couple paragraphs, but it's the son, the 14-year-old son of his, and his father are going on this journey together. And the mother's kind of peripheral for a very long time. But you see she comes back at the very end. So it's framed on both sides, beginning and end. And so at the end, when it comes back to her, and she has left because she doesn't want to hear the story. She doesn't want to hear him tell it. And then at the end, it comes full circle, and she asks him to tell it again, and he ends the whole book by starting over again. So it's a really interesting, this whole frame where from the beginning kind of how it turns out, but you don't know why or the steps along the path to how it turned out that way. So
Well, I thought he was raising a question of whether or not the curse was really repaid, because the mother said it was. And he was saying, well, these things keep coming back around.
Coming around.
So it's like,
what goes around comes around.
Maybe that curse hasn't been repaid yet.
Right.
It's nice to hear a prologue as well that's written as such a great hook like that. So it's just not your typical, say, murder mystery prologue where the murder is established and then later on we go to find out. Or it's not. It doesn't sound like it's a skip forward or back in time type of thing. Although it might do. Does it go back in time immediately after that?
So the next paragraph. Well, the next paragraph is still kind of set up, but it says, "So long ago, yes, the story begins in 1990."
Right.
So long ago. Ancient history. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're prepared for this sort of story of all our forefathers, but actually it only goes back a few years, which is really neat.
I like how you brought us a prologue that illustrates how you can hook a reader into a really great narrative and established voice, and that that protagonist as narrator without starting with big action.
Right.
It's very much establishing backstory and that kind of meta quality of, we're going to touch on these things and we're going to come around to them, and they're going to run through this story, know. So we've got a really intriguing hook without starting in media res,
Yeah, it's complete setup. He's trying to tell you, this is who I am, this is who my family is, without really, jumping into anything. You get the whole groundwork laid before you even see chapter 1. Here we go. So
Right. And I think what makes me want to read more is the curse, which we get plenty of times throughout that brief passage.
Yes.
There's a curse. It's on my family's head. We've repaid it, or have we? You know.
Right. Exactly.
Is it Robert McKee who has the saying, "Exposition as ammunition"? I think it might be, and because that's a great example of there's a lot of exposition in there, and as you say, there's no action, and there's no dialogue to speak of. There's sort of remembered dialogue maybe, and all it's doing is setting a scene, and yet it's compelling, as Alida says, probably because you've got the refrain, the callback to the curse continuing to come through, but it's by no means boring. It's not it's not a it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, blah 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 blah.
Right.
Which it could have been,
Yeah.
back in the in the 1800s or back in the 1700s,
So could you read that book without reading the prologue? Could readers skip the prologue and enjoy it, or is that essential to the story?
I think no, you could read it without it, but because I believe the end of the frame is the epilogue. So you could read it without it, and you'd get a complete story. You just wouldn't get as much of the character of the narrator or his mother. And at the end, you find out he's married and he has kids. He's telling this story to his children, who are the same age that he was at the time. So what it does, it gives a deeper richness to who and what happened to the narrator from the beginning. So that way you get to kind of see his full circle.
Yeah.
And proof of the point that the story continues.
Kathryn is frozen, so I think prologues and epilogues should be critical to the story, or you shouldn't write them. They are not a way to just tack on something like backstory, which is why I asked Kathryn that question, because even though readers could skip them and they aren't necessarily a part of the main, they're so important to the main that if you do skip them, you miss something. So welcome back, Kathryn.
You froze for us for a while there.
I know, I did too. Yeah. All of a sudden everything started going blah, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, you held very still and calm while you were under all that pressure.
Yes. Yeah,
I tried.
Great. All right. Well, final thoughts about openings. We could maybe do another episode where we talk about how to write great openings, but final thoughts about what we've read or covered tonight as we wrap up.
I think all of your author craft comes to bear on that opening, and just to go back to something that you said right at the start of the show, where these days it's part of the commerciality of selling your books as well, and we all know that 10% sample on Amazon, for example, is also a critical part. So yes, it's got to be good, blurb's got to be good, and then so many people will do sample or look inside, and if that doesn't get them quickly, they're gone. And so if you can demonstrate your craft, and we've done it with 3 literary examples, so we're not talking about genre, we're not talking about dragons appearing from nowhere or spaceships popping out of hyperspace. So we're talking about the craft of storytelling.
Yes.
And I think that applies to literary and to genre, and as I say, in terms of if you want to sell, sell's probably the wrong word. If you want an audience, if you want readers,
right?
We come back to the law of LORE law of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
It kind of seemed to me like there was 3 key components in every single one of these. You had the character, and we all clung to one character pretty quickly who had a pretty deep, immediate depth, right? A voice that was very strong, and then some sort of conflict that we immediately grabbed onto. Whether or not it was the huge plot conflict or not, it was an immediate conflict that was going on, tension that was there.
Absolutely. That was very well said. So,
indeed.
Yeah, character, voice, and tension. Perfect. On that note, we're going to say goodnight. Thanks so much for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.